My brother said, "You have no wife, no children, no life," on Christmas Day when he was stealing my money, my family. Liam, 33M, was born into a world where survival came before dreams, where every dollar had a name before it even reached his mother's hands. Extreme poverty wasn't just a phase of his childhood, it was the defining reality of his existence. Dinner was often nothing more than toast, sometimes stale, sometimes burnt, but always the only option. The electricity flickered as frequently as his mother's exhausted sighs, and the sound of the landlord's heavy footsteps in the hallway meant one thing: another month of dodging eviction notices. His mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep them afloat. She would come home smelling like bleach from her cleaning shifts, only to wash off the chemical scent before heading out again to serve tables. Liam's father, on the other hand, was a backyard mechanic, a man whose hands were always smeared with grease, whose promises of a real shop were as frequent as they were empty. "Next month," he would say, wiping sweat from his brow. "Next month, I'll have it all set up." But next month never came. Liam and his older brother, Brandon, 35M, didn't have bedrooms. They didn't even have beds of their own. Until Liam turned 15, the 2 boys shared a thin, sagging mattress that smelled of damp fabric and old sweat. Winters were the worst, nights spent curled against each other for warmth, their breath visible in the frigid air. They would lie awake, whispering about the kind of lives they would have one day. Brandon would talk about big houses and fancy cars, of vacations where they wouldn't have to worry about bringing their own food. Liam, though, never dared to dream that big. He just wanted a life where he didn't have to worry about whether they'd have dinner tomorrow. At 14, Liam decided he wasn't going to wait for a miracle. He got his first job at a local convenience store, stocking shelves for a few bucks an hour. It was humiliating at times. Customers sneering at him when he struggled to carry heavy boxes, classmates from school laughing when they saw him in his oversized uniform. But he swallowed it all. Pride wouldn't pay rent. Every spare moment he had, he spent at the public library. There, among second-hand books and outdated computers, he taught himself coding. The first time he wrote a basic program and saw it execute correctly, he felt something foreign: power. It was a stark contrast to the helplessness that filled every other corner of his life. His hard work paid off. He landed an entry-level IT job as soon as he was old enough, a paycheck that was more money than his mother had ever held in her hands at one time. Without hesitation, he began funneling his earnings into the family's survival. He covered bills that had been piling up, paid off old debts that kept his mother awake at night. When his mother broke down crying one night over the pain in her teeth, pain she had ignored for years because they simply couldn't afford a dentist, Liam made sure she got the care she needed. It was the first time in years he saw her smile without wincing. But not everyone in the family saw Liam's success as a blessing. Brandon had always been the golden child in their parents' eyes, the firstborn, the one who carried their father's charm, if not his ambition. But while Liam worked tirelessly to pull the family out of poverty, Brandon drifted. He worked odd jobs, barely keeping himself afloat, until he met Jessica, 34F. She was ambitious, beautiful, and completely unwilling to accept the life of struggle that Brandon had settled into. So, naturally, when she saw Liam's rising success, she saw opportunity. Brandon and Jessica began asking Liam for money. At first, it was little things: a couple of $100s for car repairs, a few bills they had fallen behind on. Then it became more: rent, credit card debt. "Just a loan," Brandon would say, always with that same easy grin. "I'll pay you back next month." Liam knew better than anyone what "next month" meant in their family. But saying no wasn't easy. How could he? This was his brother, the same person who had shared his suffering, who had held him close on nights when the cold crept through the thin walls of their childhood apartment. So, he gave. Again and again. And then came the biggest ask yet. Brandon and Jessica wanted to buy a house. A fresh start, they called it. A chance to build something for their future. But their credit was terrible. They needed someone to co-sign. Liam hesitated. He knew what it meant to be legally tied to Brandon's choices. If something went wrong, he would be on the hook for it. But Jessica was persuasive. She painted a picture of family barbecues in their own backyard, of Christmas mornings in a home that was truly theirs. And Brandon, well, he just looked at Liam the way he always did when he wanted something, as if saying no would make Liam the villain. So Liam signed. The weight of the pen in his hand felt heavier than it should have. His signature, once something he had used to sign checks that saved his family, now chained him to a responsibility he wasn't sure he could afford. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Brandon and Jessica struggled with payments. The excuses started rolling in: unexpected expenses, bad months at work. Liam covered the shortfalls, telling himself each time that it was temporary. But deep down, he knew. He had spent his entire life clawing his way out of poverty, only to find himself trapped again. This time, not by circumstance, but by family. And the worst part? He knew that when everything inevitably collapsed, when Brandon and Jessica lost the house they never should have bought in the first place, there would only be one person left holding the burden. Liam. Liam had spent his entire life pulling himself out of the pit he was born into, but no matter how much money he made or how many sacrifices he endured, his family refused to let him forget where he came from. Worse, they resented him for it. It didn't matter that he had paid their bills, kept a roof over their heads, or co-signed the house that Brandon and Jessica had no business buying. To them, he was still the kid who used to sleep on a torn mattress, still the younger brother they could take from without ever having to give back. At every family gathering, the insults were subtle at first, disguised as jokes, but the laughter always had an edge to it. "Oh, look who thinks he's too good for us now," Brandon would say, clapping Liam on the back with just a little too much force, right after asking for another small loan. "Must be nice to throw money around like that," Jessica would add, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "I guess when you've got so much of it, it doesn't even matter." Liam never responded. He just swallowed the humiliation, just like he had as a child when he went to school in shoes that didn't fit, when his father made promise after promise that never came true, when his mother sighed into her hands late at night, staring at overdue bills. He had learned young that arguing didn't change anything. But the worst part came when he met Ava. Ava, 31, was everything Liam had fought to become, a self-made woman who knew what it meant to struggle. Like him, she had clawed her way out of poverty, built herself up brick by brick, and refused to let the weight of her past crush her future. She understood him in a way no one else ever had, and for the first time in Liam's life, he felt like he wasn't carrying the world alone. And his family hated her for it. Jessica was the first to attack. She didn't do it directly, not at first. Instead, she spread rumors, letting her words slither through the family like poison. "Did you hear about Liam's new girlfriend?" she'd whisper loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She's got expensive taste. Must be nice, having a rich boyfriend to pay for everything." At first, Liam brushed it off. He thought, naively, that if he ignored it, they would stop. But they didn't. Jessica was relentless. At dinners, she would make passive-aggressive comments, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. "Gosh, Ava, your nails always look perfect. Do you ever pay for them yourself, or does Liam just take care of that?" Ava never flinched. She had grown up surrounded by people like Jessica, women who hid their insecurities behind sharp words, who tried to drag others down because they couldn't lift themselves up. But Liam saw the way her fingers curled into her lap, the way her jaw tightened. Then came the real blow. When Liam proposed, he knew there would be drama, but he underestimated just how deep their resentment ran. They had gone to dinner at his mother's house, a small celebration, just Liam, Ava, Brandon, and Jessica. The moment Ava's ring caught the light, Jessica's expression twisted into something ugly. "Oh wow," she said, her voice dripping with false admiration. "That must have cost a fortune. Did you pick it out, Ava, or did Liam just hand over his credit card?" Ava stiffened, but before she could say anything, Liam spoke. "Jessica, don't." His voice was quiet but firm. That should have been the end of it. But Jessica wasn't finished. "A gold digger and a family traitor," she spat, slamming her glass down on the table. "I knew this would happen. The second you got some money, you forgot where you came from. You'd rather throw it all at some woman who wasn't there when we were struggling than help the people who actually matter." Liam felt his stomach drop. He looked at Brandon, expecting, hoping, for him to say something, to tell Jessica to stop. But his brother just leaned back in his chair, watching, as if he found the whole thing entertaining. "You think she loves you?" Jessica continued, her voice rising. "She loves what you can do for her. You're just too blind to see it." Ava stood then, her face carefully blank. She didn't shout, didn't lash out, didn't let Jessica see how deep the words had cut. Instead, she looked at Liam. "I'm going to wait outside." And then she was gone. Liam sat there, his hands clenched into fists under the table. The air felt thick, suffocating. "She's using you," Jessica said, as if she was doing him a favor by saying it. Liam exhaled slowly, pushing his chair back. He looked at his brother, the man he had grown up with, the man he had sacrificed for over and over again. "Brandon," he said, voice steady. "You know that's not true." Brandon shrugged. "I don't know, man. You do kind of throw your money around like it's nothing. Maybe Jess has a point." Liam felt something inside him snap. "You mean the money I used to pay your rent? The money I put toward your house?" The money I handed over every time you asked. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, you're right. I do throw it around. But not on Ava. On you. Brandon's face darkened, but Liam didn't wait for a response. He turned and left, stepping into the cold night where Ava was waiting by the car. She didn't say anything as he approached, just reached out and took his hand. For the first time in his life, Liam realized something. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who stood by you, who lifted you up instead of pulling you down. And he was done being dragged back into the past. He squeezed Ava's hand, exhaled, and let go of the weight he had carried for too long. Liam had spent years pulling himself out of poverty, working tirelessly to build a future that didn't involve the kind of suffering he had grown up with. He had given more than he should have, sacrificed parts of himself for a family that never truly saw him as one of their own. But nothing could have prepared him for the betrayal that came next. It started when their father got sick. Liam's father had never been a perfect man, but he had always been stubbornly proud. Even when his mechanic business never took off the way he had promised, even when he had to rely on his wife's income and Liam's silent financial support to keep things afloat, he still held on to the idea that one day, he'd have something to pass down to his sons. The house, the garage, the small savings he had scraped together. It wasn't much, but it was his. Then cancer took everything. At first, Liam visited as often as he could. He sat by his father's hospital bed, talking about everything and nothing, pretending he didn't notice the way the man shrank a little more each time he saw him. He offered to handle the bills, to make sure his father wasn't worrying about money while he was fighting for his life. But before he could do anything, Brandon and Jessica stepped in. "We're handling it," Jessica had said one evening when Liam arrived at the hospital, her tone clipped and impatient, as if he were intruding. "Dad gave us control over everything so he doesn't have to stress." Liam frowned. "He told me he wanted me to help with that." "Well, he changed his mind," Brandon added, crossing his arms. "You're busy with your job, your fiancé. It's just easier this way." Liam didn't like it, but his father, frail and exhausted, nodded along. "It's fine, son," he had murmured. "Brandon's got it under control." And that was the beginning of the end. Liam still visited, still tried to be there, but something had shifted. Jessica always seemed to be in the room, hovering like a vulture, subtly steering conversations away whenever Liam brought up finances or legal matters. When his father's health deteriorated further, Brandon and Jessica insisted on handling everything, claiming they were just making things easier for everyone. Liam should have known. He should have realized what was happening when the lawyer who had worked with their father for years suddenly stopped answering his calls. He should have questioned why Brandon and Jessica were so insistent that their father didn't need to worry about money anymore. He should have seen the trap closing before it was too late. But he didn't. By the time their father passed away, everything was already gone. The house, the garage, the small savings account that Liam's father had mentioned so many times, the one he had wanted to split between both of his sons. The inheritance Liam had never touched, the money he had assumed would be his someday, not because he needed it, but because it was meant for him. It was all in Brandon's name. Liam found out on Christmas. He had been dreading the holiday, knowing that it would be the first one without his father, but he had shown up anyway. His mother had insisted. "It's what your father would have wanted," she had said, and so Liam had gone, Ava's hand in his, trying to push away the sinking feeling in his gut. It was worse than he imagined. The house, once a place of warmth despite its worn-down walls and patched-up furniture, no longer felt like home. It had been redecorated, stripped of any trace of the man who had once lived there. New furniture, new fixtures, things Liam knew his father never would have spent money on. Brandon and Jessica sat comfortably at the head of the table, basking in their victory, while their mother bustled around, acting as if nothing had changed. Then, over dinner, she dropped the bombshell. "Well," she said, setting her fork down with a satisfied sigh, "since everyone's here, I suppose it's time we talked about what your father left behind." Liam straightened, expecting some acknowledgement of what was rightfully his. Jessica smirked. "Everything now belongs to Brandon," his mother continued, her voice gentle but firm, as if she were offering him a kindness. Liam blinked. "What?" "The house, the garage, the savings, it's all in Brandon's name now," she said. "Your father signed it over before he passed." The words felt like a slap. Liam's hands curled into fists under the table. He turned to Brandon, who was watching him with an infuriating smirk. "That's not possible," Liam said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Dad wouldn't." "Oh, but he did," Jessica cut in. "He signed everything over a few months ago. It's all legal." Liam turned to his mother, searching for some kind of explanation, some kind of denial. but all she did was sigh, as if he were being difficult. "Family is more important than money," she said simply. Liam could barely breathe. "You mean the money I spent helping you? The money I used to pay your bills, to keep you from losing this house? That money didn't matter." His mother flinched, but before she could answer, Brandon leaned forward, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Come on, Liam," he said, shaking his head. "You have no wife, no kids, no life. You don't need that money." The room fell into silence. Ava sucked in a sharp breath beside him, her fingers tightening around his arm, but Liam barely felt it. His brother, the same brother he had once shared a mattress with, the same brother he had defended, protected, sacrificed for, was looking at him like he was nothing. Like he had never mattered at all. Liam pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. "You stole from me," he said, his voice shaking with rage. Brandon shrugged. "Dad signed it over himself." Liam turned to his mother. "Did you know about this?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "That's all there is to say," she murmured. "Let's not fight about it." Liam let out a hollow laugh. "Of course," he said, his voice bitter. "Because as long as Brandon gets everything, it's fine. That's how it's always been, hasn't it?" Jessica leaned back, smirking. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Liam. It's just money." Liam exhaled slowly, staring at the people who had once been his family, feeling a strange sense of detachment settle over him. He had spent his whole life believing that if he just gave enough, if he just worked hard enough, if he just tried hard enough, they would see him. They would appreciate him. They would love him. But they never had. And they never would. Without another word, Liam turned and walked out, Ava right beside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking back. Liam walked out of that Christmas dinner feeling like a fool. Not because he had lost his inheritance. Not even because his mother had looked him in the eye and told him that family is more important than money, while handing everything over to the same brother who had done nothing but take. No, Liam felt like a fool because, after everything, he had still believed there was a line Brandon and Jessica wouldn't cross. He was wrong. That night, as he sat in his apartment, staring at the walls with Ava next to him, something inside him shifted. A quiet, seething rage replaced the familiar ache of disappointment. He had spent his entire life giving, paying their rent, covering their debts, co-signing loans, fixing their problems. And how had they repaid him? By stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. Ava, who had always seen through his family's manipulations, placed a folder in front of him. "You kept records, right?" she asked. Liam blinked at her, then at the folder. Slowly, he nodded. Yes, he had kept records. Because despite all the abuse, despite the years of being treated as nothing more than a walking ATM, Liam wasn't stupid. He pulled out his laptop and opened a private folder. Receipts, bank transfers, emails, loan agreements, years of transactions, neatly documented, each one proof of what he had done for them. At first, he had kept records just to keep himself sane, to remind himself that he wasn't imagining it when Brandon claimed, "I'll pay you back next month." That next month never came. But now, those records might be the only thing that could finally bring his family's reign of entitlement to an end. Liam started digging. What began as an attempt to understand how his father's assets had ended up in Brandon's name quickly turned into something much worse. Brandon and Jessica hadn't just taken their father's house and savings. They had committed fraud. 1. The GoFundMe scam. Liam found the campaign by accident, buried in Jessica's social media. A fundraiser for their father's medical expenses. The page was filled with carefully curated photos. His father in a hospital bed, Brandon standing beside him looking grief-stricken, Jessica's long-winded posts about the rising costs of cancer treatment. They had raised over $155,000. Liam scrolled through the updates, his stomach turning. Jessica had posted tearful thank yous to the generous donors, talking about how every dollar would go toward life-saving treatments. It was a lie. Liam pulled up the financial statements for Brandon's house. The same month the GoFundMe hit its goal, Brandon and Jessica had paid $80,000 for a full kitchen remodel. Granite countertop, custom cabinetry, top-of-the-line appliances. Another $20,000 had gone to furniture. Another $15,000 to luxury vacations, expensive dining, and shopping sprees. The medical bills? Barely touched. 2. Fraud in Liam's name. It got worse. When Liam checked his credit report, he felt the blood drain from his face. Brandon and Jessica hadn't just stolen from their father. They had stolen from him. There were 3 personal loans taken out in Liam's name, totaling nearly $70,000. A mortgage default notice. A credit card he had never opened, maxed out at $15,000. Brandon had used Liam's spotless credit history to apply for loans, knowing that Liam's financial stability meant instant approval. Liam stared at the screen, his fists clenching so tightly his nails dug into his palms. They had used his name, his trust, and when they couldn't keep up with the payments, they had simply stopped paying. He owed money he never borrowed. Lenders were about to start coming after him. And his family? They had never planned to tell him. 3. The house scam. Liam had assumed his father had signed everything over to Brandon out of some misguided loyalty, manipulated by Brandon and Jessica in his final month. But that wasn't what happened. Liam finally got a copy of the legal documents, and the signature on the transfer agreement wasn't real. His father's signature had been forged. Brandon and Jessica had taken advantage of their father's failing health, tricking him into signing vague paperwork while he was on heavy medication. They had essentially stolen the house, ensuring Liam got nothing. Liam sat back, feeling a sick kind of clarity settle over him. This wasn't just family drama. This wasn't just another Brandon being Brandon moment. This was criminal. The plan. Liam didn't go to them. Not yet. Instead, he spent the next 2 weeks collecting everything. Bank records, loan applications, fraudulent signatures, screenshots of their social media posts, a detailed timeline of the GoFundMe transactions, copies of emails where Jessica bragged about their home upgrades, just days after withdrawing thousands from the fundraiser. He compiled it all into a report so airtight no lawyer could talk them out of it. Then he made the calls. The bank, the credit bureaus, the police. And he waited. Christmas was just the beginning. Liam didn't say a word to his family. He acted normal, showing up to small gatherings, nodding along while Brandon smirked at him across the dinner table. Jessica continued making her little comments, pretending their last argument had never happened. Their mother still spoke to him in that placating tone, telling him to let it go, reminding him that money isn't worth breaking a family over. Liam didn't argue, because soon, the money wouldn't be the problem. Soon, Brandon and Jessica would learn what it felt like to lose everything. And Liam? For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one paying for their mistakes. The downfall of Brandon and Jessica didn't happen all at once. It came in slow, crushing waves, each one hitting harder than the last. At first, they didn't even realize what was happening. Liam didn't tell them about the fraud case. He didn't warn them that the bank had launched an internal investigation or that the credit bureaus were flagging their account. He didn't mention that law enforcement was quietly gathering evidence. He just waited. Then, the first wave hit. Brandon and Jessica woke up one morning and found their bank accounts frozen. Every single one. Their credit cards were declined. Jessica couldn't withdraw cash. Automatic payments bounced. Panic set in immediately. Jessica, who had spent years treating Liam like a bottomless ATM, called the bank, demanding answers. "Ma'am, due to an ongoing investigation into fraudulent financial activity, your accounts have been temporarily restricted," the bank representative explained. Jessica's stomach dropped. "What kind of investigation?" she snapped, already feeling the eyes of the people around her in the store where she was trying to buy groceries. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that." Jessica was still yelling when the call disconnected. Brandon's reaction was worse. When he found out, he stormed down to the bank in person, his usual smug confidence on full display, right up until they told him the same thing. He pounded his fist on the counter, demanding access to his money. The manager only shook his head. "Sir, this is a federal investigation. There's nothing we can do." Brandon's face went pale. The realization finally set in. They were screwed. The second wave. The house foreclosure. With their accounts frozen and their loans already in default, it didn't take long for the bank to come knocking. A foreclosure notice was slapped onto their front door. Brandon and Jessica had spent months ignoring warnings, convinced they could figure something out. Now, their house was officially being repossessed. Brandon tried everything. He yelled at the bank, tried to delay the proceedings, begged their mother to intervene. She refused. After everything, even she couldn't protect him. Jessica was hysterical. "We'll lose everything," she screamed at Brandon. They had drained every resource, burned every bridge, and now they had nowhere to go. Then came the final blow. When their house went to auction, they expected some random buyer to get it. Maybe a real estate investor, maybe another family. Instead, Liam bought it. The same house they had stolen from him, the house they had laughed about owning while telling him he didn't need money, now belonged to the very person they had betrayed. Brandon and Jessica found out when they saw the new deed. Brandon nearly lost his mind. "You did this," he roared, storming up to Liam's doorstep, his fists clenched. "This is your fault." Liam stared at his brother, the same man who had spent his entire life taking from him, and felt nothing. You stole from me, Liam said simply. Now you have nothing. Jessica was sobbing, gripping Brandon's arm. Liam, please. We have nowhere to go. Liam looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then maybe you should start a GoFundMe. The same words Jessica had once used to scam people out of $155,000. She choked on a sob, realizing, finally, that there would be no more handouts. The third wave. The public humiliation. When the fraud case went public, everything collapsed. Jessica lost her job first. The company she worked for immediately cut ties with her. Her boss didn't even give her the courtesy of a formal meeting, just an email that read, "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. We do not associate with criminals." She tried to sue for wrongful termination, but nobody would take her case. She was toxic. Brandon wasn't far behind. Word spread fast in the local mechanic community. No one wanted to bring their cars to a shop run by a convicted fraudster. Customers stopped coming. His boss gave him a cold stare and handed him his last paycheck. "You're done here." Brandon tried to protest, but the man cut him off. "I don't trust you near a wrench, let alone someone's vehicle. Get out." Brandon and Jessica were completely ruined. Their credit was destroyed. They drowned in debt with no way out. They had no house, no income, no reputation. They had laughed at Liam, humiliated him, told him he was nothing. Now they were nothing. The final wave, their desperate plea. Liam was done with them. They had taken everything from him, and he had taken it all back. Still they came crawling. Brandon called first. His voice was hoarse, broken, begging. "Liam, I screwed up, okay?" he stammered. "I made a mistake. But we're still family." Liam let out a cold laugh. "Family? You mean the same family that told me I didn't need money? That called me a traitor? That stole from me?" Brandon was silent. Jessica took the phone, her voice shaking. "Please, Liam. We have nothing. We just need a little help to get back on our feet." Liam didn't hesitate. "No." Jessica gasped. You can't just abandon us." Liam's voice was steady. "You abandoned me years ago." Then he hung up. Brandon and Jessica had spent years treating him like an outsider. Now they knew what it felt like. And Liam? For the first time in his life, he was free.